Well, thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Simply Finance. I'm pumped today to have on the co-founder and CEO of Huron, Matt Mullenax. And Matt, I'll let you just kind of give a little intro if you don't mind.
Yeah, Shane, thanks so much for having me. Super excited to chat about all things Huron and whatever else we want to discuss. But I guess a quick kind of background on me and how that transitions into Huron. So originally from Ohio, went to the East Coast for undergrad, graduated in '08, embarked on a quote unquote finance adventure to New York City. Quickly realized that maybe that wasn't the best place for me to be in 2008. So started to put some feelers out there as kind of what else I could do, kind of as an entry level position. Ended up, very fortunately meeting the guys at Bonobos, which was a team of 5 at the time. So, the world of DTC really didn't exist at that point. So I ended up leaving my investment banking job and becoming the 6th employee at Bonobos, which was a great experience for me. Spent a little under 2 years there, and was a part of a team that we grew pretty rapidly at that stage. But it was fun to kind of look back, not only to see what some of those people are now doing, kind of 10, 12 years later. A lot of them have kind of gone on to run and manage companies, definitely at scale within the D2C sphere. But just also to think about kind of the evolution of the direct-to-consumer landscape, right? I vividly remember a Saturday in January of like 2009 thinking about whether or not we wanted to offer free shipping. So just like some of these aspects are now kind of ubiquitous within the D2C sphere. We're really kind of quote unquote cutting edge at the time. So that was a really cool experience. So after Bonobos, ended up moving to Chicago, got back into finance, spent a few years at UBS in investment banking, and then spent a few years in a consumer private equity role, investing in brands like a Bonobos. So kind of early growth stage, kind of first institutional check-in. And that to me was a phenomenal experience. It kind of gave me a little bit of the operating vantage point into businesses across the spectrum. And I think that's really where I got kind of my professional affinity for the broader personal care and beauty landscape, where obviously the margin structure was awesome. The product replenishment. So these are products that you could in theory buy 8, 10, 12 times per year.
Right.
And I think one of the things that kind of stuck with me was, there's so many awesome, compelling brands targeting the female consumer in this space. And kind of for the time frame purposes, this was 2012 to 2015. So brands like Drunk Elephant and others.
Right.
But there really wasn't a lot of brands doing that for guys. Like I said, I'm kind of from Ohio, I was living in Chicago at the time. So your options were what was at Bloomingdale's and what you would find at Walgreens, right? And there's a whole lot of white space in between. So I thought that was always kind of compelling. And then to be, super transparent, on the personal side, I was just a kid that grew up with bad skin, right? So I had tried seemingly everything that existed at your local Walgreens, CVS, Kroger, what have you, and nothing really worked. I'd gone the dermatologist route and, experimented with a bunch of those products and, and even medications. And for whatever reason, just it didn't really stick. And it really wasn't until I was out west for business school, which is what I did after leaving Chicago, that I wandered into one of those more premium personal care stores, beauty stores, that I reluctantly bought a $70 face wash. I was like, well, here goes nothing. And the product worked and my skin responded positively. But I think for me, what was a little bit of an internal tussle, which was I didn't like paying $70 for that product. B, I didn't really know anyone who did. C, the whole experience was kind of off. But I knew plenty of people who would seemingly like the results. Right. So the thought was, how can you kind of bridge that gap? And without being too cliche, that was kind of like the light bulb moment, which was, could you actually create a brand that offered products that looked, felt, acted, performed like some of these more higher end brands, but at a price point that made a little bit more sense, with a brand that seemingly resonated a bit more, a tone of voice that kind of spoke to you, the consumer. And that's kind of what I was ultimately interested in. So we ended up launching a survey in mid to late 2017, just to kind of understand what was out there, right? Like, what do guys buy? Like, do you buy on Amazon? Which price points are you comfortable paying? What does your routine consist of, if you even have one? Do you still use bar soap? Like, any of those questions. And then we actually took all those data points, thousands of them, and actually built and launched a fake brand, which was super interesting. So we built an entire website, built a website, and then ran social media campaigns all across 5 markets. So we tested Detroit, Kansas City, Minneapolis, Columbus, Chicago. So kind of like the broader Midwest.
Yeah.
Just to see like, was there anything there? Was there any traction? And for me, that was like a really good kind of piece of third-party validation, for lack of a better term, that, I had this internal hunch that I thought there was some momentum here, but I wanted proof points, right? And I think that's oftentimes a misconception of entrepreneurship, that a lot of folks are very risk-seeking, right? And oftentimes you're quite the opposite, which is you're constantly looking at ways to kind of like make sure that what you're about to do, there's actually some traction there. So had a lot of success with that. So we, my girlfriend at the time, fiance now, we moved from San Francisco back to New York to kind of pursue this full time. So I landed here March of 2018 and kind of ran kind of 3 parallel processes. One was trying to figure out a creative agency that could kind of bring the brand to life, per se. 2 is we raised a little bit of angel financing, so kind of raising money and fundraising. And then 3rd was trying to create product. And I was very fortunate enough to be connected to this guy, Matt, who's ultimately my co-founder now. Matt makes it easy or difficult, however you want to look at it. And he spent upwards of 20 years developing product for some of the most recognizable brands in the world. So he worked under the Estee Lauder umbrella. He built kind of the men's Tom Ford line, for instance. He worked with Lab Series. So he was kind of, the mad scientist, so to speak, and how to actually make these products. And I think our common thread around vision and who would ultimately benefit from these products was certainly there. And he was kind of the person that knew how to make the super high quality stuff. And I was kind of the person who had the experience of not being able to pay for that stuff, but knew a bunch of people who would like the results, right? So, the journey was on and kind of how to bridge that gap. So yeah, we ended up working on, formulations for the broader part of 2018 and into 2019, and ultimately launched actually last July. So a little under a year old.
Wow.
So that's kind of the not so short backstory.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, there's so much in there to unpack. I think one of the questions I actually had, because I read some article online about you starting the fake website, I thought that was such an interesting way to do it. I mean, to your point, I feel like a lot of people have a hesitation maybe to like start something. So one of my questions to you is going to be, what's your suggestion from going to 0 to 1 if you have an idea or a concept? But you sound like that's kind of your answer to that, was you just kind of tested it. You didn't actually start a company yet. You just took the general thought and started a fake brand, which I thought was wild.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really interesting process. I mean, and I wish I could take credit for that idea, but literally I was sitting with my roommates in San Francisco at the time, and we had gone out just for a few beers, and I've been kicking around this idea, and they're like, well, why don't you just do it? Like, just put up a website. And I was like, I don't know how to build a website. And they're like, dude, there's like a bunch of tools. It's like not difficult. Just like put one up and see what happens. And so then that kind of like seed was planted in my head, and I'm like, maybe we could just do this for a really low cost way. And that's going to be much more cost efficient to see if this thing actually has legs versus if it's a totally awful idea.
Right.
But I think, in kind of thinking about that process in general, there are a million reasons why you can tell yourself no, right? The timing's not right. I'm about to move. For me personally, I just graduated business school, and I was like, I got to pay back these loans.
Yeah.
There's a million reasons to say why this is not the right time, but you have to be kind of your own cheerleader, per se. Like, you will always find kind of an out route or a backdoor to say like, just not now. And I think for me, I was like, you know what, like, let's do it. Let's just see what happens. Everyone's story is different, but would encourage people, if they're thinking about things, there are very low cost ways and tests that you can kind of conduct to see whether or not your idea that's been manifesting inside for however long actually can get traction.
Definitely. Yeah. What were, from that test, do you remember what were like some key findings that kind of took you from concept to like, okay, I'm going to do this, that you remember?
Honestly, it was a good question. I mean, that exercise was less around solving for some KPI or meeting some threshold, right? For me, it was almost like a gut instinct of, are there enough proof points that would suggest that this is actually something worth pursuing? And I think for me, it was just a volume of attempted checkouts. And, what was kind of like a little bit of a disingenuous piece was, when creating an Instagram account, you obviously have to create an email address, right? Mm-hmm. So people would see our Instagram ads, they'd visit the site, they'd attempt to check out, they'd add products to cart, and they couldn't, because we obviously weren't collecting credit card data because we couldn't ship product because there weren't any.
Right.
So I got a hefty amount of hate email being like, your website sucks, it's broken, like I can't check out, this is awful. And I was like, ugh, like, sorry.
Just hold on, we might actually do
wait.
this.
Yeah, just wait. Just give me a little bit of time and we'll be back. But yeah, no, I think for me, it was just kind of like more of a binary yes or no. Does this opportunity have, have legs? And I thought that it certainly did.
Okay. That's awesome. No, that's so cool. A question I love, I've heard this before on podcasts. Do you remember the conversation with your significant other? So you said fiance, when you kind of like talked into yourself into like, yes, I'm doing this. Do you remember that?
Really good question. We actually didn't have that conversation one-to-one. So I was doing some consulting work at the time and helping a few brands. Some were going through a fundraising process and just figuring out ways where I could use kind of prior experience, kind of help brands who were going through growth stages. And we were actually sitting in a bar with some friends on a Saturday in San Francisco. And one of her friends actually asked me, she said, well, what's up now? Like, what are you working on? I was like, oh, I'm actually like going to pursue this personal care thing. And my fiance, Sarah, looked at me and she was like, are we telling people that now? And I was like, I guess we are. So I've actually never thought about that till now, but that was kind of, I guess, the moment. And then from there, look, I mean, it's a perfect example, right? Like you can always say like, like I have this thing, but I'm not really focused on it. Or,
for sure,
it goes back to, there's so many reasons why you can ultimately say like, this is not the right time, or, maybe in a few weeks or months. But I think that was actually a pretty good turning point to say like, no, this is something I'm actually going to pursue.
Right. And then probably once it was out there and you told people about it, then it's almost like a little bit of a fire. Like, okay, shit, I kind of got to get started on this now.
You've officially jumped off the diving board.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. And I thought it was interesting. I was looking through your LinkedIn and your background. I was curious, did you get much heat from family, friends when you you've done all this investment banking? Bonobos was interesting because I used to actually worked at Walmart.com when they acquired Bonobos in e-commerce for them. So that was a funny tie together. And then you went to Stanford and then decided to start this. Did people, I think it's interesting to ask entrepreneurs, did you get a lot of doubt or hesitation from family and friends?
Yeah. No, I was very, very lucky in that regards. My parents have always been extremely supportive. My mom's been a teacher. She actually retired this year, 37
awesome.
years. And my dad never had the opportunity to go to college. He worked at Delta right out of school. So to be quite honest, like this notion of the business world was very nebulous to them, right? When I was working at Morgan Stanley in 2008 and staying till 7 a.m. working on stuff, they're like, ooh, what are you working on? Like, what is possibly that important? Like, why don't you go home at 5? And I was like, it's just not really how this works.
Yeah.
But no, they've always been extremely helpful and supportive. So I feel, very fortunate in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. You, and I was going to say, you mentioned when you moved to New York doing some angel investing. I think since this is a kind of a finance related podcast, I thought it'd be interesting to kind of get your take on, you went the angel route early. Was there a reason you decided to raise money versus try to bootstrap, or like, what were your thought processes when you went through that whole process?
I think everyone's situation is a little bit different. So for me, I was just kind of transitioning out of business school, and I was like, well, I got to figure out like how to live, more or less, right. especially in New York. And I think one of the things for me that was very, very important was investing in brand. And what I mean by that is, we were still at the time almost 18 months away from launch, but thinking about, what's the brand name? What's the color scheme? What does the packaging look like? What's the tone of voice? What will the web experience be? I mean, those are so integral pieces of the puzzle that oftentimes, as a regular consumer, you probably overlook 99 times out of 100. But just thinking about the minutia where you really kind of exhaust over like, is this the right Pantone red, or is that the right Pantone red? Or does your logo have rounded edges or square edges? I mean, these were like heated debates and discussions. But we wanted to create something that really resonated with the broad audience from time zero. And I think I certainly saw that at Bonobos. Obviously, RX Bar, kind of the same, like this notion of identifying a brand, understanding what the brand stands for, and not being maybe confused with like a completely different brand redesign or anything like that. we just wanted to come out with, we felt like was something that was strong, was clean, but it was also high quality and kind of reflected the product that would ultimately be inside of it.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I remember we moved into a new office for RX the end of or beginning of 2018. But I think Peter actually brought in a bunch of samples of Huron, and they ended up floating around. We had this, the section of desks where there's a lot of guys that sat, and they just were like everywhere one day. And I remember looking at the packaging and loved it. I was like, this is such a great idea because like no one's doing this. And like all of us guys that work there were, I don't know, we work for a company, RX has simple packaging, and
Sure.
I think the Huron simple packaging really connected with a lot of us. So I totally get that. I think it's interesting too, your path to go to market and the e-commerce component. I'm noticing a lot of these brands that I've been talking to lately all have a really strong D2C component or their only component. Was there a big strategy behind just the D2C component of launching that way for you guys?
Good question. I mean, I think for us, like obviously my experience at Bonobos had certainly played a factor into that. And I thought one of the things, maybe the most important thing I learned at Bonobos was, how to create this insanely intimate relationship with your customer, right? And, we were a small group of 5 or 6 at the time, but like everyone had a customer service role, regardless of background or role within the company. And I think that for me was something that really carried over to ultimately Huron. And just thinking about how can we create this kind of crazy one-on-one engagement that people would feel comfortable telling us about like their bad skin stories, right? Like we fielded a ticket yesterday where someone literally wrote in like a 2-page email around kind of their personal journey and like how Huron has like meaningfully impacted that. And like, that's a pretty amazing email to get, right?
Definitely.
The fact that someone would take the time to write that. And those are kind of the things and the data points that we can point to and say like, what we're doing is actually pretty awesome. I mean, we're kind of in a small way, but we're effectuating behavioral change, right? We're kind of figuring out how people can better take care of themselves. And, this is not, a life-changing brand by any means, but if we can give a guy a little bit more pep in his step as he's leaving his house or his apartment every morning, like that's a pretty cool win. So sorry, I completely deviated from your original question.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. No, I was curious. That's fantastic. It's funny. I connected really when I started like learning about Huron. When I first got those samples, I had the same problem in college. Like it's funny. I never had a lot of acne, and then I got to freshman year of college, and all of a sudden it was all over my face. And I didn't figure out until junior year that I was using Old Spice, and I had some weird reaction to Old Spice. And so I, went through that whole route of trying to find something clean and simple. And, I did end up finding some random brand that worked, but I would have loved to run into something like Huron where that's like the goal. It's so I think there's probably so much more of a need. And to your point, I think a lot of guys don't really talk about it. So it's
totally. And I mean, there's a little bit of like a discovery process, right? It's, there's a period of time where it's just like, it is what it is, which is like my least favorite saying of all time. But like people are just like fine with the status quo, right? It's like, okay, like I'm breaking out. That's normal because I'm in my early 20s or my late teens, whatever. Then there's like maybe I should do something about it. I have no idea what to do or where to go. So maybe my sister, girlfriend, fiance, whomever, like maybe she has stuff. I'll just start dabbling there.
Definitely.
Then it turns into like, okay, like I have some experience and it's like, I kind of like the way my skin feels. Like maybe I'll actually like pursue this a little bit. I mean, we actually put like a funny Instagram post up today, kind of like reflecting that kind of the evolution of kind of men's thinking.
That.
But
yeah, I was just looking at it before I got on here.
Yeah,
that's funny.
But I think the way that we try to communicate that, even on our packaging, for instance, is, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, which is like, how can we be as simple and straightforward as possible, right? Mm-hmm. Like how much to use, what you can expect from this product, like how should it be applied, and then let me be on my way. Like I don't need a paragraph. I don't need like a label that's going to pull out to a booklet. Like just give me what I need to know and let me be on my way. And I think that's a misnomer for a lot of guys, which is like, I don't want to have this defined skincare routine because it's going to involve 46 steps. Like that's not the case, actually. It literally adds like 8 seconds to your morning routine. Definitely. Right. And that's kind of like the goal is to help guys like get out of their own way when it comes to some of these products.
That totally makes sense. Have you guys seen, I mean, obviously you're heavy, online and D2C. I saw you guys are also on Amazon, and I read an article about, you guys are in like CrossFit boxes now, which is an awesome segue, obviously, to, what RX has done too. So
Sure.
how is like the different sales avenues, how have they kind of gotten traction for you guys? I'm curious because it's such a different type of product. Like I would never think to buy, skincare or, body wash at a CrossFit box, but I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, and it's obvious like the merchandising strategy is different from an RX bar, right?
Yeah,
Like
right,
unfortunately we can't, no one's going to just like casually buy a face wash after doing a workout every day. But I think what we realized is there's a not too small a number of folks who go to the gym in the mornings and then shower and go to work every day, right? Or 5 days a week or 4 days a week. So if we can almost like hijack that behavioral loop of,
right.
you know, I'm showering here 4 days a week and I really like what's in the shower here, so I'm just going to buy that for home. Like
Yeah,
that's a really interesting kind of brand discovery mechanism. So the CrossFit box thing has been actually pretty productive for us. And obviously it's a very engaging community, as you can certainly speak to.
definitely.
Uh, I think for us, for Amazon, what's been really nice, is it's almost like a validator in some extent. So what, maybe someone will read an article or see a press piece on Huron, and then they'll just immediately go to Amazon and be like, is this actually a real brand? Like,
Right.
does this actually exist?
Yeah.
And I think having a presence there has been huge for us, especially over the last 3 months with COVID, because people have just kind of turned to Amazon to be like that one retailer that is going to deliver and is going
Yeah.
to be on time, right? Because
Right.
I'm a Prime consumer. So I think having a presence there has actually been extremely helpful over the past, like I
And
said, three.
you guys probably fall into the like necessary items, I would imagine, right? Because you're like,
Yeah,
something that's
exactly,
cleanliness. So yeah, that's even better, right?
exactly. Exactly. And I think, for better or for worse with COVID, I think people have now become much more aware and conscious of what they're putting on their bodies, right? There's
Yeah,
just been this
definitely.
increased emphasis around hygiene and self-care and personal care, which I don't think is going to go away anytime soon. I mean, I think will people be washing their hands for 45 seconds at a time every clip? Like maybe that practice will fade a little bit, but I think
Right.
there's an increased awareness to at least, the practices that they're currently going through.
Yeah, definitely. Have you guys seen a huge spike just in orders during COVID? I know like just a lot of e-commerce platforms have seen that. I'm sure you guys probably have.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a busy past few months. I mean, I think we kind of sit at an interesting intersection between D2C, having an Amazon presence, and then being in kind of the broader personal care category, right?
Right.
Which, and any three of those elements have kind of seen a little bit of a tailwind. I think any company that's operating kind of in our sphere has certainly seen a bit of a lift over the past 3 or so months. So yeah, we've been very fortunate in that regard.
Right. Got it. Are you guys planning on like is your distribution strategy right now do you guys want to be in larger like brick and mortar locations or are you guys trying to like stay in the D2C lane for the time being?
Yeah, I think for us, really since time zero, getting offline has actually been pretty important.
Okay.
So, the CrossFit gym angle is a good example of that. But I think for us, figuring out who the right retail partner universe is something that'll be very, very important for us. But also understanding how retail is going to change going forward,
Yeah.
right? There will
Right.
be some stores that won't come back after COVID.
Yeah. Right.
Sad, but it's just kind of a matter of fact. So understanding not only the evolution of our consumer, but where does he or she shop ultimately going forward, and like how can we be there and have a presence?
Right. Yeah, I can imagine like when you said the CrossFit situation, it reminded me of like, I used to at RX used to work a lot with like our specialty accounts. It's like what I came into. So it was like e-commerce and specialty. So like, the high-end gyms like Equinox and Lifetime Fitness. I feel like a lot of those would love to have, their showers there. They just have like random no branded shampoo or whatever in there.
Sure.
So I'm sure that's a big play too. That's so
Yep.
wild. It has I think what I was trying to get to earlier, I was thinking back to is my D2C question was, is that something you would suggest, like any CPG brand should kind of go through that avenue? Like, I guess I know the backstory of like how it worked at RX and the pros and cons of that, but I'd be curious from your perspective and then at Bonobos too. Is that something that you think is just like the best testing ground for any type of product you're selling is to start online?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think from a pure test opportunity, it's the best thing you can do, right? It's going to be very difficult for you to pre-launch fill a 200,000 unit PO from Target, right? You better have some pretty clear certainty that the product's good or it's going to work. I think with the D2C angle, it allows you to understand, who's clicking on your ads, who's ultimately buying products, what products are they buying, for what reason, how long are they staying on site? I mean, there's so many little takeaways that you can extract just from one person's consumer journey. It's honestly kind of scary.
Yeah,
obviously you have exposure to that, but in terms of proof points, like there's not really a more efficient channel that I can think of that you can still kind of control your own destiny, right? Like obviously going the retail route or the wholesale route is very attractive because the volumes are much larger and you're getting POs for thousands and thousands of units. But then you're kind of relying on maybe a 18-year-old store associate to be your best brand ambassador, right?
Yeah, exactly.
With D2C, we have the opportunity to engage with these customers one-to-one. If someone sends in a chat with a question, like it's pretty likely that I'm the one that's going to be answering. So we can start to have like this really engaging conversation. And I think, one of the things that we've really put on our shoulders is like, we want to have those conversations because those are terrific opportunities. And Peter used to talk about this all the time. Those are terrific opportunities to extract so much from customers, not in a transactional way, but like, how'd you hear about us? Like, what can we do to improve? Like, what about this site sucks? Like, what would you like to see different? There's just like so many opportunities to have really engaging conversations that you just totally miss out within the wholesale channel.
Yeah, right. I know when I started at RX, what was interesting was they made, no matter what your function was, you had to go through 2 weeks of customer service. That's like all you did from 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And I've worked in corporate finance my entire career, then going to RX and then not doing finance for 2 weeks at all and just sitting in customer service. I gained so much empathy just for the process of starting a company. I mean, you get random, old lady calling in, like curious about what this thing is in her bar. And you're like trying to talk her through it and explaining the pros and cons. I mean, it was just so interesting to like talk to customers. I know, for me, I think that's got to be one of the most exciting things about starting your own thing is, you understand exactly what goes into it and how it was made. And when you get to talk to your customers and actually get that feedback, that almost, to me, just felt like an invaluable thing. And it wasn't even the thing I created. I was just a part of it. But for someone like you who's actually started it, I'm sure that's an awesome component of building your own business.
Totally. And again, I think you hit the nail on the head perfectly. It's just that immediate feedback loop, right? You understand what's working, what's not, how do we fix what's not, and how do we double down on what is? And I think that's constantly going through our heads at all times. Got it.
One thing I thought of is also another interesting thing I like to ask founders is, do you remember the first, I guess version 1 of your first product? Do you remember that first time you made it?
Awful. It was awesome. It was awful. We worked with a manufacturer that we ultimately pivoted away from with our pre-launch assortment. So that, that added a few months delay to our official launch date, which really made me contemplate a lot of bad things. So I was like, man, this is terrible. We're going to run out of money. We're going to do all this stuff. Right. And I'll never forget, it was October-ish. Can't remember the time frame, something around there, early fall. And we did a trip with some friends to Houston, and I was like passing on samples. I was so excited.
Yeah.
And people are using the product, and I'm just looking at their reaction, and they're like, yeah, this is great. And they're kind of talking. I'm like, guys, what? Just tell me what's going on. They're like, my face honestly feels like it's going to fall off right now. It is. So, I was like, oh my God.
Burning? Something
yeah, it was just, so it was a face wash, but it was so drying. It felt like you were literally using sandpaper to wash your face.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. So obviously immediately called other men. I'm like, hey, we got to what's going on here? Here's the feedback I'm getting. It's just funny to think about kind of how far the product has come, because I think, coming full circle, being a brand in 2020, a D2C brand, even a brand in general, your product has to be awesome. Mm-hmm. Having good product is kind of table stakes. I do think there's still a little bit of a moat around having absurdly great product, and wildly biased, I would put ourselves in that category.
Yeah.
But I think people have a high degree of expectation what they're ultimately buying online. like the packaging has to be on point, the unboxing experience has to be awesome, and the product better, fall in line. I think there
Right.
was a time early on where you could kind of get away with like really chic packaging and like a cool look and feel and like a quippy tone of voice and have like very suspect product. That time has certainly come and gone. So I think for us, like we've set the bar really, really high for ourselves, because like if we're not loving our own product, how can we honestly communicate that to our customers?
The
Right.
100%. Yeah.
And so we have to be the biggest product advocates for our own products. And we have that in mind constantly. And we probably drive our manufacturers crazy because we're constantly like, this is close, but we need to fix this. And even once we release a product into the market, I mean, we're still evaluating what can we do better. Is this level of this right? Or is it too high, too low? So we're constantly tweaking. But that's why we think like, that's kind of the degree to which we hold our product to.
I think that high quality standard though is probably what's going to carry you guys, really far. I think there's probably a lot of I feel like you could get into anything and compromise quality and you can last you a little bit, but to your point, to have like a cult following and to really have like, especially in the, you're going into communities that I would argue like, especially with fitness and CrossFit specifically, like those are some cult followings that you probably get one chance to have a high quality thing. And if it, as just as well as anybody, if something comes in and someone has a bad experience with it, it spreads through the community pretty quick.
Yeah.
So that's wild.
You're exactly right. Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think, ultimately what we're trying to do is kind of decommoditize a commoditized purchase.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's no shortage of options walking into your local Walgreens and buying body wash. Right. So can we actually convince you that it's worth a few extra bucks for this product? And I think, there are interesting ways kind of on the information or education side that have proven, to be good scripts and narratives for us, but it's tough. And you're right. You do kind of get, one shot at times. So it's really got to resonate.
Yeah. And that's really true. I mean, I was thinking about it before we came on here. I'm like, yeah, last time I went to buy body wash, I remember I just went and like looked at the prices. That's like all I did.
Totally.
And that's probably what a lot of guys do, I would assume.
Totally. I mean, a funny analog, and I was guilty of this back in the day. I feel like guys shop for body wash like you shop for Gatorade, right? It's like, oh, just give me which flavor do you want? I want yellow. It's like,
yes.
Well, yellow's not a flavor. That's the color of the cap. And like, but that's how a lot of guys are like, oh, I use the green. It's like, well,
yeah.
Green like, what? Like, also, like your body wash is green. Like maybe that shouldn't be the case.
Right.
So it's just like, again, I think for this category, it's really interesting because decisions have been made on autopilot for such a long time. Like
yes.
During the course of your day, you go through thousands of decisions. The last thing you want to do is read the back of labels at your local Walgreens, CVS, what have you.
Right.
I think what we're trying to do is say, like, Shane, by all measures, like you're actually a premium consumer. You just might not know that yet. Like buy bonobos, you don't buy Dockers. Yeah. You eat RX bars, you don't buy Bar X. So, like, why wouldn't you be willing to spend $3 extra on body wash when it's going to be better for you? Because 100%. I think this notion of premium in this category is like you own a $700 serum and you do masks 7 times a week, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? It's just spending a little bit more, but it's doing so kind of in parallel with how you're living your life currently, anyways. So again, it's just kind of this notion of like helping guys like get out of their own way a little bit and be like, yeah, like I should be probably taking better care of myself.
Definitely. And I think there's probably a little bit of an uphill battle, I'm sure, for you guys. I know for me, I grew up in Indiana, and I feel like when I was in Indiana, it was very common for me to go to like sports clips for my haircut, cheapest gel I could find. Same with shampoo and, body wash. And then I remember moving to Chicago a couple years ago when I came to RX. My wife's from here. Going to like a barber in Chicago and realizing how much more I'm paying. And then like I remember my barber the first time I went asked me what hair product I use. And I was like, hair product? I'm like, it's like gel? What do you mean? And I told her and she was like, what's in that shit? Like there's so much stuff in there that you don't want to put on your head. So that started like spinning in my mind. So I can only imagine like when you think about across the country, how many uneducated guys even realize like what they're like. It's funny. Like I've read an article, you talked about it, where it was like, to your point, people are worried about what they're putting in their bodies, making sure they're exercising and all these good things, but sometimes they're not even thinking about the body wash and like what's in that. And so I feel like you guys are doing you have such an awesome mission. I'm sure it's the education piece that's probably the hardest.
It is, yeah, and certainly appreciate that. And I think you bring up a really interesting point. Like, one, I'm sure you walked out of that barber's chair feeling like $1 bazillion, right? It was probably like the best haircut you've ever gotten. I think now, honestly, what's funny, and this is a very salient point for the time, but like, guys consider themselves like, I don't care about this category. I've used the same thing for however long. Are the same guys who are like, I have got to get a haircut like as fast as humanly possible. It's like, well, I thought you didn't care. So what? But now all of a sudden, like getting a haircut is like literally the top 3 things on your priority list.
100%.
So just again, it's like, it's not even really the educational part. It's getting guys to like see and hear and like understand that like this is just part of how they're already living. We talked to some, like, for instance, one of the models we use in our photo shoot, he's a big guy. He installs elevators.
Okay.
And then backstory, when we sourced our models for the shoot, we kind of identified all of our models. None of the guys were models. We literally just walked around Lower Manhattan. We're like, hey, what are you doing on Tuesday? Like, want to come in and interview for this photo shoot we're doing? We'll pay you a few $100.
So you just took like random guys.
100%. None of them had any modeling experience beforehand. And like, that was like important for me. And I remember kind of in our brand building efforts, like we were talking about this photo shoot and they were like, we're going to use this modeling agency. And I was like, for what? And they're like, to source models. I was like, nope. Like, we're going to go find our models. And they're like, really? I'm like, yep. But I'm like, but that's part of it, right? There's this cool element for a lot of our assets on the site where there's almost like a little bit of uncertainty around like, how do I actually use this product? And like, that's exactly the guy that we're talking to.
Yeah, right.
And I wanted that to kind of like manifest itself in the photo shoot. But anyways, we were going through this photo shoot and like we had built this makeshift shower. It was hilarious. And oddly enough, the model's name's also Matt. And he's just an absolute unit. He's like 6'6". He's huge. We didn't want to buy a full shower, obviously, because that would have been super expensive.
Sure.
So we had one of our set designers like literally on the step ladder, like pouring a bucket of water on him to like act as a shower. And he's like scrubbing with our body wash. He's like, man, this stuff like actually smells good. I'm like, yeah, dude, like, yeah, thanks. Like I told you.
Right.
Afterwards, he's like, like I've always used just kind of like mass market stuff because like I didn't really care. But I also used a $60 beard oil. And I'm like, hello, like, guess what? You're a premium consumer. Like, because $60 is really expensive for a beard oil. So again, it's just kind of like, what are the tactics to get kind of this light bulb to go off for this guy? And that's kind of like what our mission is, right? Like our job is to help guys help themselves. We're not here to tell you what to do. We're here to kind of arm you with product to help you like find your own way, so to speak. But
anyway. That's awesome. No, that's such a good story because that's exactly how I thought about it when I was on your site. When I was just looking through it and I was like, that's funny you said beard oil because I was thinking that. I'm like, I have friends who spend so much money on beard oil. I was literally thinking that today when I was thinking about the brand. And I was like, but I bet they don't spend that money on their other like body care stuff. And It's even funny when you say premium, like it's like you guys are premium versus like the mainstream stuff for sure. Like if you saw it on shelf, I would think. But then I was talking to my wife today and like I was asking her how much some of the stuff is that she buys. And I was like, oh, that's your $75 bottle type stuff. So even for guys, like I think to your point, it's like, yeah, it's gonna be more than the mainstream stuff, but it's for good reason. Like there's quality in it.
Yeah, exactly. And even with our body wash, for instance, like it's a lot thicker than your typical body wash. It just lasts longer. I mean, whenever I open up one of our bottles, I literally write the date on when I open the bottles.
Okay.
And I shower like a weirdo. I shower all the time. So I shower probably twice a day and sometimes more. And the last month yeah, right. I just like the product. It took me 38 days to go through that bottle of body wash. So when you think about like how long the product actually lasts, like it lasts a pretty long time.
Yeah.
So I think like once people understand like, okay, I don't need to like pour a gallon of this for every single shower. Like it's like, okay, well this actually lasts a little bit longer because it's of better quality. But again, like that's part of like the educational piece, the informative piece that is on our shoulders to make sure we're communicating well on site.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. And I'm sure for you guys, is word of mouth like a big thing at this point?
It is. But honestly, I mean, it's also tough because like how many people you walk around the street being like, yo, do you use Huron body wash? It's so awesome. Like it's different versus like being able to point out a pair of Allbirds or even bonobos or, some outward facing piece of clothing. But yeah, I mean, we do get a lot of traffic via word of mouth, which we're obviously very, very appreciative of.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I had another question. I'm going to pivot just a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
I'm very interested in, I've always been interested in like how two founders or multiple founders come together and just like their pros and cons, especially obviously for me at RX, seeing Peter and Jared just yin and yang, like they're just perfectly good at the opposite parts of the business cycle. Your co-founder, Matt, I mean, you explained at the beginning his background, which sounds like he comes from a breadth of knowledge in this industry. How did you guys get connected?
We were connected through a mutual friend that I had met through kind of the business school community. So he was an investor and he knew Matt because he had reached out to him a few times, just kind of looking at various deals in the space. And when I had spoken to this person about like, hey, I'm moving to New York, here's what I'm thinking about, he's like, oh, you should definitely meet this guy. And I was like, yes.
Right.
So he looped us in and, we, kind of a standard, intro meeting, like you meet for 30 minutes for coffee. Our first meeting was like 4.5 hours long. I was
wow.
This is insane. I was like,
You
I
hit
could
it
stay
off
here all
from
day.
the bat.
Yeah, it was great. So it was very serendipitous, I think, on both of our parts.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask kind of a similar question that I asked before. Do you remember the actual conversation where your co-founder, Matt, and you kind of, again, just were like, yes, we're doing this?
Good question. I mean, so that first meeting was kind of like the first stepping stone. And then, it kind of worked as like an advisory relationship. And then, as we started to get into development, we just talked about like, look, we're on the phone for 2 hours a day, every day anyways, like, let's just do this.
Love it. Yeah.
And yeah, we've kind of been in the trenches since then. So, but to your point, kind of like Peter and Jared, like our skill sets are incredibly complementary. Okay. And I think that allows us to one, like obviously be not down each other's throats at all times, arguing over, some things we have two different perspectives on. Not to say we agree with everything, but aside from kind of the product development world, Matt comes from like a consumer insights, content marketing world, which has been super, super helpful. And I think what that allows us to do, and I really respect him on this point, is we overanalyze everything, but we also understand how important it is, right? So before an email gets sent, before a social post goes out, like we are all like, should we change this to that? Like every single word is analyzed because there's such an importance and a focus around voice. Because I think voice for us is ultimately what kind of draws a lot of consumers to the brand. It's meant to be very relatable. It's meant to be very inviting and welcoming. It's not like hey, we're this brand from New York. Like if you don't have 1,400 steps in your personal care routine, then you can't sit with us, right? It's actually quite the opposite. We kind of adopt the tone of voice or the relatability of kind of an older brother, right? Where it's like, maybe we're a little bit ahead of you, but we're still kind of figuring out as we go, but we're like not quite out of arm's reach either. So it's just kind of, again, meant to be very inviting, welcoming, relatable. And I think we're able to kind of attack that from two different angles, and the output has been very good for us thus far.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, that sounds like a very powerful combo. And I'm sure, I don't know if you want to talk about it on here or not. Do you guys have a like plan for future like line extensions, I'm sure?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we have some few things coming up that we're really excited about. We actually probably in the clear to talk about this, but we had actually made a run of larger body wash bottles for gyms.
Okay.
Because what we learned, which is kind of a blessing and a curse, was a lot of gyms were like, these products are amazing. Our customers love them, but we can't carry this anymore because everyone steals them. And I was like, well, that's like a good data point and a terrible one at the same time. It's like great for brand, terrible for business.
Yeah.
So like, okay, we need to make like the pump jars. So anyways, like basically right before COVID, we had done a small run of these that we thought would last almost a year, at least 6 months in terms of getting it out to gyms that we work with. And we thought we'd be in the clear. we're like, you know what, like obviously gyms aren't open, unclear when all of them will be back open. Why don't we just do like a little teaser launch to just our email subscribers? We won't put anything on social. We won't put anything on our website, and let's just see what happens. And we sold out in 8 days.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, okay,
Congrats.
this is good to know.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, right.
So what I'm getting at is, you know, it's been fun to be super engaged with our community and be able to turn on something that's new and shiny and bright and see the level of receptivity to that. So we're excited about a few launches that we have in the pipeline.
That's exciting. That's exciting. Yeah, I use hair product like crazy. So if you guys want to work on that, I would be I'll definitely be a huge fan.
Yep, noted. Okay, good to know.
That's awesome. Let's see. What was the next thing I wanted to bring up? I think one of the things that I thought was interesting when I looked at your background, you know, it seemed like you had this hunch for a long time that you like thought there was a gap in the market, and then you kind of kicked it around. You tried launching, you know, the fake brand, the website, and then gave it a go after business school. You did have like a finance background and worked in finance at a couple different firms. Do you think any of those or one of those was, you know, what was the best prior experience to being an entrepreneur that helped you like be successful to kick off Huron?
Yeah, really good question. You know, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what quote unquote the best experience was per se. And honestly, once we got into market, I was like, man, there are so many things I don't know anything about. Like, I really wish I had a background in performance marketing or content creation, like zero background in that stuff. I think one, exposure at Bonobos to, again, the customer service and the customer experience side of things was very, very important and an important foundational piece to how we think about our relationship with our customers at Huron, because our job is to substantially outkick our coverage in terms of how we're working with our guys and our customers. So that was certainly a really great experience to have before ultimately pushing go with Huron. I think from a finance capacity, like just understanding working capital and margin and AR and AP and a lot of those things that you know, not a lot of founders really have access to, you know, before ultimately launching. Right. It's certainly not the sexiest of topics, right? You know, creating a beautiful Instagram post or an amazing email, like those are skills I certainly don't have, and they're like fun to have and fun to talk about. But I think the nitty gritty of saying, great, like our weeks of inventory on hand is X, we need to place a PO by Y, and being able to kind of figure that out pretty quickly and speak with the team internally and saying like, great, like let's get that out today. I think that's allowed us to have a bit more flexibility. I think it's allowed us to act a little bit more nimble, and allowed us to have like very frank conversations with our manufacturers, right? Like, what can we do to lower the MOQs? What can we do to lower delivery and transport costs such that, you know, our margin improves? You know, there's so many little factors and levers that we can pull that, you know, without spending a number of years in finance, like I don't think I would have had a strong grasp on that. But again, like I feel like I might have a leg up in some of those fields and am like wildly underqualified in others. So it's certainly a balancing act.
Sure, that makes sense. Like really being an operator, it sounds like that's really what you've taken from a lot of those other roles. And I'm sure Bonobos, I'm sure at that stage you were at, to your point with customer service, I'm sure that was a huge launching pad for how you guys wanted to handle customer service here on. That totally makes sense.
Yeah. And I also just understood like the notion of like being able to act and function as a really small, nimble team. Like we did that for a number of months, right? And I think, you know, for better or for worse, kind of the wave over the past 18 to 24 months in D2C is you'd look at a lot of these brands, they're not brands, they're companies, right? There are hundreds and hundreds of employees, and there are amazing social events, and there are really cool happy hours, and the work-life balance is great. But like, honestly, what I appreciate at Bonobos is like you would go to work on a Sunday because there were things that you had to get done, and your other 5 team members would already be there because they had the same frame of mind, right? So there's this hunger and this drive, honestly, led by empathy, that I think we've been able to create within our small nucleus of folks that has really created a really good culture. And it's not to say that, you know, we're on 25/8, but we are so emotionally invested. You know, we really understand what the goal ahead is. We understand what the vision ahead is, but it's like, it's fun. Like, this is by far the most rewarding job I've ever had by eons. So it's fun to wake up every morning and just feel like I'm not going to work, but feels like, we're building something for our consumer.
That's exciting. Yeah, I'm sure that's an awesome feeling to have. Is it how big, like how many people do you guys have at Huron today? Like what size is the company?
The team is three,
Three.
including me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't realize it was that small. And was there a reason you decided to start it in New York? Was there an advantage of being on the East Coast there?
So my fiance is from the East Coast, and her company that she works at had offices in SF and in New York. So it's a pretty easy transition for her. And when we moved out here, I was in idea phase. So she got to captain that ship. Obviously, I was like, you go wherever, I'm along for the ride. But New York is a really good place for us because a lot of really close mentors from Bonobo's days and elsewhere here. And there's just a really good D2C pulse here as well. The opportunity to benefit from other brands, other founders, other D2C kind of executives has been really, really great. It's a very welcoming and very friendly community, which we've benefited tremendously from.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was gonna say I'm always curious of like where companies decide to kind of put their anchor. But I can imagine with just the breadth of people and companies in New York too, and obviously your background, that makes a ton of sense.
Mm-hmm.
The one finance question I kind of hinted at, but I wanted to kind of ask directly. I think
Sure.
it'd be interesting for a lot of people that listen to this podcast, just to give you a little background, are, either a lot of people that are getting started with investing. I have a lot of people that have reached out who just are interested in starting their own company and want to understand a little bit more, to your point, like the operator component of starting a business if they don't have a finance background. And so I was interested in, I personally honestly don't know a ton about this, but when you go, and you guys obviously had a successful seed round of funding, what is like some of the steps to even start doing that? Like when you before you guys started to even go raise money, like what was like step one, and like what would you suggest people if they have a concept and they want to go raise money, but maybe they don't have a connection pool? Like how do you even get started in that process?
Yeah, and I will preface this by saying, we're very fortunate to have been able to raise some outside capital to kind of get Huron off the ground, but it was a slog. And I talked to a lot of people, and I got a lot of no's.
Okay.
So just kind of like understanding and kind of setting expectations that like it's not easy. And I didn't think it would have been easy, but I thought that we had a compelling story with kind of two co-founders with compelling backgrounds and some compelling connections within the D2C space. And sometimes that doesn't matter. So it was, it was certainly tough, but, just kind of thinking back on kind of like our early fundraising decks per se, I think one of the things that moved the needle for a lot of people was that early test that we actually did to say like, okay, great, you have this hunch that this will work, but is there any data behind it? Do you, aside from industry data that you can Google, do you have any first party information that says like Huron will be a winner because of X? And I felt like being able to recap that experiment and talk about some of the learnings there, I think was a good enough proxy to say, I firmly believe this company will work because we did this kind of experiment over the course of a few weeks, and here are the results that we saw. Then we went and found Matt, who's kind of has this amazing background, very relevant to the space. But it was still tough. So I think that exercise kind of added some substance to those conversations. But I think from a starting point, aside from like getting a pitch deck and whatnot put together, look towards brands that you respect in the category and just kind of work backwards. Like, who invested in this brand, who invested in Harry's, who invested in Dollar Shave Club, and start reaching out. I mean, there's no secret sauce really, but what I would say also is, understand that you're going to get a lot of no's, but that's okay, because oftentimes a no will lead to a yes. Because a question that I would oftentimes ask at the end of meetings, if there wasn't a fit, but there seemed to be kind of a connection with the person on the other side of the phone, was, thanks so much for your time, really appreciate it. Do you have anyone in mind for whom this may be a better fit? And oftentimes those doors that were opened oftentimes led to a yes. But you would never get at that if, you took the no personally and you're like, oh, screw this person, like they don't believe. And it's like, that's not always the case, right? It could be not the right time. Maybe the category is not right for them. Whatever the reason may be. but to actually make the ask of, okay, if this isn't for you, do you have a short list of folks who may be interested? And that's honestly how I got to a lot of the angels who ended up participating in the round.
That's great advice, to kind of just never give up and keep grinding and keep moving along. Yeah, I think I'm assuming a lot of people that I've chatted with think that that's kind of like there's this like magic pool of people that are just like waiting for every request. So that's great to know that like it's like just like anything else, like going to get customers, going to get funding, you kind of got to hustle and go find it yourself.
Totally. It's kind of like it's kind of like playing defensive back in football, which I played in college. Like you gotta have a short memory. I gave up a shit ton of touchdowns in college.
Okay.
You gotta have a short memory. There's
Right.
always a next step, right?
Uh-huh. Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's never, the no is never personal. Although I got some really interesting emails back in response that were no's. It's rarely never personal. But you just have to, continue to believe in the vision, continue to believe that what you're ultimately going to put into the market will be a winner, and have that, confidence, not arrogance, but confidence. And hopefully that will resonate with whomever's on the other end. And they're willing to intro you or to connect you to others who may be a better fit.
Got it. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I have a kind of a dumb question. The reason I'm calling it dumb is because I'm sure there's tons of reasons and I just don't know it. But I remember this was a thought that I had when I interviewed with Peter at RX was for Huron, for example, and maybe you probably had this question when you went through some of your pitch decks and you were pitching investors for seed funding. But do you guys have a pretty good assumption of why there haven't been some of these major brands that have tried to come out with a cleaner product that kind of fits in like the competitive set where you guys are?
I honestly think there have been, and not too dissimilar from RX. I mean, you've seen a number of big co-CPGs, especially in the food space, try and come out or do a rebrand rather, with something that may be healthier, simpler, et cetera.
Right.
I think what happens is, a lot of folks who are millennials or whatnot are kind of programmed to see a lot of these big brand names and say, not for me.
Definitely.
And I think there's also like a little bit of there's a little bit of pride in being able to sport like a smaller brand, right? And it's something that, you want to tell your friends that you just bought a pair of Allbirds, or like, yes, those are Bonobos pants. Like there's like this cool, what am I trying to say? Like almost relationship with these brands that, if you feel like you're kind of contributing to their growth story a little bit, that you're not going to get with Nestle, right? Or a Unilever maybe. So I think there is a little bit of that pride and kind of brand discovery, which is kind of a cool factor. So it's definitely been attempted by a lot of these larger brands. I think what's the tide is turning a little bit on is kind of these massive exit opportunities, where people are basically just, or these companies, these big co-CPGs are basically just buying up distribution lists, right?
Yeah.
Like these billion-dollar acquisitions because, companies doing 50 million in revenue, like it's probably, those days have probably come and gone. I think now, which is what we're focused on, which is how can you actually kind of cross the chasm from being a brand to a business, right? Like we operate in a category where the margin structure is pretty favorable. And if we get to a point where we're super efficient from a spend perspective, like we should be profitable in a pretty healthy way. And that's certainly what we're striving to get to. So I think it's, especially over the last 3 to 6 months, I think the tone is changing a little bit for how quickly can you grow your top line to can you actually be a sustainable business? And I think that becomes a pretty interesting and compelling argument for anyone, and including you as a business owner, right? Because then you can say, we don't need to go raise money because our business is spitting off cash. So we can self-fund the business. And I think that is ultimately the driver's seat that you want to be in.
Got it. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. It's funny. We've seen a similar thing just at RX, and you've probably seen this maybe, with Peter and Jared with, your relationship with them. But yeah, it's funny how these big brands try. And I think that is something like our generation we kind of have this thought in the back of our heads about some of these huge brands. And to your point, would much rather be connected to something smaller has the connection to millennials and the things and, things we care about and the way we talk, I think even too. It's an interesting transition.
I also think for some folks, it's almost like a way to kind of like scratch that entrepreneurial itch, which is, I've found a lot of these cool niche early stage brands that I like to support, and I read about their websites and I read all the emails, and it's just, you kind of feel interconnected. We have like a pretty engaged community right
Okay.
now,
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds of customers, which who would have thunk a lot of guys would want to talk about face wash and body wash, but like it's awesome.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
And so
fantastic.
I think there's just this heightened level of engagement and support for kind of early stage brands that don't have a massive CPG logo stamped on them.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. That totally makes sense. Um, Last couple questions I had. One,
Sure.
well, I'd just be curious from your perspective, and again, without telling me anything you can't tell me, what is the next, year? What's like the 1-3-5 plan at a high level for Huron from your perspective look like?
Yeah. Really good question. I think one of the areas of improvement for me personally is like, I need to spend more time thinking about that. Like I and the three of us as a team are just so in the trenches at all times.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I love being in the trenches, but being able to oscillate between being in the trenches and then having a bigger kind of strategic vantage point, I think is something that the three of us can all really work on, to be quite frank. And I think for us, like, I'm less worried about manufacturing some sort of financial output, or if we get to this number, then we can do this. And really the focus is on what can we do to better serve our existing customers, and how can we convince more new customers that Huron is a brand for them. And I think when you just kind of simplify things down to those two kind of pieces of the puzzle, a lot of that stuff down the road kind of takes care of itself, right? Because what that ultimately translates to is, how well are you retaining your existing base, and how efficient can you go acquire new ones or new
Right.
customers? And I think at the end of the day, for better or for worse, like that's what a lot of these efforts boil down to. So we're thinking maniacally around how can we turn a customer who's bought from us 3 or 4 times to make sure that he buys from us for the next 7 years. And then how
Okay.
can we
Yeah.
convince someone who's on the cusp, like what is it that's ultimately going to move them across the finish line? Whether it's new products, whether it's a different way we're engaging with them, what is that we can kind of continually build this loyal base that we've that we're grateful to have cultivated thus far.
Got
So
it.
that's kind of
Yeah.
like a roundabout answer that doesn't really directly answer the question, but I think for us, like, look, we'll slowly build out the team. I think one of the things that Peter and Jared executed to a T was they hired when they needed to hire, right? I think there's this fallacy around kind of like hiring ahead of growth. Well, what if that growth never happens? Then you just have a super bloated organization, right? So we try and put a lot of eggs in the buckets of really high skilled, high qualified candidates when we need them.
Mm-hmm.
And
When
right
you're
now
about
it's
to
like,
burst.
right, exactly. Right now we are extremely busy, but we're growing and we're okay. We're not at capacity yet. For a while, Matt and I were stretched incredibly thin, and we added one. And while it may seem crazy to say you added one, I like to say that our team grew by 50%.
I
So
was
when
gonna
you think
say,
about it
yeah.
like that, we're like, wow, like we just added a lot of capacity. So we're very intentional about everything that we do, and I think we'll slowly build out the team, but it'll be when we need to add them. Yeah, and I think when you think about 3 and 5 year, like I don't even know what's on the docket for tomorrow, so it's hard to really talk about that. But
Sure. That makes
for
sense.
us, and then I'll shut up. I think one of the things and pieces of advice that I would have for anyone who's thinking about starting a business is, this is one big exercise of opportunity cost, right? When you're speaking with a service provider X who's pitching you, you're not answering customer service tickets. When you're thinking about, topic Y, like you're not critiquing your performance marketing strategy. So there's always this push pull. And I think one of the things that, that I've always tried to remind myself of is, we need to be continually honing in and refining the scope, like not expanding our focus, but actually constricting it, and really think about addressing those 2 buckets that I talked about earlier, which is essentially acquisition and retention. So yeah, that's kind of how we're thinking about things.
Love it. No, that's great. And you guys are like, to your point, you're in the trenches right now and you're trying to grow a business. And I think there's a lot of excitement in that, not getting too in the clouds. You don't know a lot of what's coming, so you're trying to figure it out as you go and build it, in the right ways. So
Totally. Now I will say this though, don't get me wrong. Can Huron be a $500 million business? Like, absolutely. I mean, if you just run the math around, look at a guy who's bought Old Spice since he's been 15 years old. That's
Yeah.
10 purchases a year over the course of 10, 15, 20 years. Like, and you do that across not too many consumers, and all of a sudden you get there pretty quickly. So it's just, can we attract the right guy and convince him that this is the brand for him, and then make sure that we're doing everything that we can possibly do to retain him as a loyal customer. Like, I don't think that output is crazy reaching for the stars. I think it's something that we need to execute on such that we can get there. But what we're worried about in the very immediate term is making sure we're building the right infrastructure in place so that we can get to that level.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And then I can only imagine, I mean, you guys seem like you have the branding, the packaging, and the messaging that if you get enough people to know about it and then you go into bigger retail, it's going to be a slam dunk, I would think, especially for guys that, go to Costco or go wherever.
Totally.
It's slam dunk. My last question, this one is like not finance related or business really related at all, but I'd love to ask everyone I have on here is, do you have any suggestions for if you had one book or, article or something for knowledge to pass on to somebody else that you would suggest?
Yeah. The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. I'm not sure if you've read that, but I'm kind of a sucker for consumer psychology and psyche. And it talks a lot about just habit loops and routines and what drives routines and how do you break and form routines. And I think for us, like, we operate in a category that is very routine driven, right? Like, you get in the shower, you throw some shampoo in, you reach for a body wash, you wash, maybe you wash your face. Most of the guys we're talking to probably don't. You hop out, you dry off, you get on your way, right? So what are those cues? What are those pieces of, insights, knowledge, education that we can offer this guy such that all of a sudden the face wash becomes something that's more routine? Is it like we're suggesting, hey, put this by your toothbrush so you know to do it twice a day? Like, what can we do to kind of like hijack that habit routine so that this becomes an autopilot practice and we get into his, again, for lack of a better term, routine, but knowing how guys tend to shop for this category and use products, right? It's, I buy what I have always purchased, so I'm not really interested in making a change. That is our biggest opportunity, is being the brand to effectuate that change. So going back to the book, I mean, I think it's just it's spelled out in a very interesting, graspable, intuitive way. And it just goes through like so many data points. It talks about Febreze, talks about so many different case studies around how things are rebranded, remarketed, the script has changed, et cetera, that I've gifted it to Matt. I gifted it to Johnny when he first started. So awesome. I think it's a book that drives a lot of kind of the why behind Huron, but also like the tactical element of things as well. So yeah, that's if we had a bookshelf and had room for one, that would certainly be the one.
Fantastic. That's exactly what I was hoping for. I will, I'll definitely add a link to that in the show notes just so people can find that. That's awesome. Cool. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. This was a blast. I had a pleasure getting to talk to you about it. Is there, obviously everyone go check out, it's at Use Huron, right? On Instagram.
Yep.
And then, is there a way to get a hold of you that's best for people, whether that's, email, social media, anything you'd want to share?
Yeah, I'm just Matt at usehuron.com, so it's pretty easy. I respond to everything. It might take a little bit, but I respond to everything. So yeah, I mean, look, I've been the beneficiary from a lot of helpful mentors, friends, et cetera, who've kind of helped this journey. So I'm always open to sharing thoughts, insights, feedback, et cetera. Yeah, so feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Matt, thank you again so much. I know you're a busy guy, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come on to SimpliFinance, and hope you have a great day, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon. But good luck with everything with Huron. I'm definitely going to pick some up. So
awesome. Thanks, Shane. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt.
See ya.
All right.
Bye.
See ya.